Welcome to Preemptive Strike, the show where we look at the first hour of a JRPG to gauge the entertainment value of its opening act and gather statistical data to analyze the trends across different games. Join us as we journey through the rich history of JRPGs to see how their gameplay evolves and innovates from one game to the next. For each game, we'll examine how the first hour sets the tone for the rest of the journey, explore the ways in which the story and gameplay unfold to draw the player into the world and keep them coming back, as well as explain general tips, tricks, and trivia for a first-time player. Today, we'll discuss all of this and more on Preemptive Strike, Episode 1, Dragon Warrior. Hi, this is Chad.
And this is Tyler.
And this is the first episode of Preemptive Strike. And today, we'll be looking at the game known as the grandfather of all JRPGs, Dragon Quest. Or, as it's better known in the West, although arguably worse known nowadays, Dragon Warrior for the NES.
Yeah, this is a pretty old game, especially considering this is 2024, almost 2025 when we're recording it. Originally released May 27th, 1986 on the Famicom. The US, we would not get it for another 3 years in August 1989.
That's pretty late in the NES's lifespan.
Oh, it was, considering Dragon Quest 2 and 3 were already out in Japan itself at the time. And Nintendo actually suggested that they update the original Dragon Quest 1 before releasing it into the West. And what they upgraded was they updated the graphics, and they added a battery, so you could actually save on the cartridge instead of having like just a password to do your saves like the original Famicom release.
Now, how did people in the West react to this game coming? What did they have to go off of?
So there was a few computer RPGs at that point, because 3 years had passed since the original Dragon Quest releasing in Japan. So there's the Ultima series, so that was like the not most prominent, but it was a very prominent one for the JRPG, or just RPG scene in general in America, so they kind of just saw original Dragon Quest, or Dragon Warrior as they know it as pretty basic, just because the competition had time to actually develop more.
Mm-hmm.
So Dragon Quest, or Dragon Warrior, was developed by Chunsoft, and it was published by Enix. Some notable staff members, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, Yuji Horii. Still around today, still kicking, producing all the Dragon Quest games.
Looking forward to Dragon Quest 12.
Fingers crossed. We got Koichi Nakamura, the director. We got Koichi Sugiyama, that he's no longer with us, who did the music. And then, probably the biggest name here is Akira Toriyama. Might have known him from a series called Dragon Ball.
Yeah, both Sugiyama and Toriyama were big names, even back in the day that they were added to the game, added to the development team of the game. And they stayed with the series all through their lives. And they did some amazing work that has really stuck with the series throughout its whole lifetime.
Mm-hmm. And without Toriyama, we probably would not have the series as much or as many games as we do today. Because even in Japan originally, the sales weren't super great with it. But with a lot of Shonen Jump interviews with Toriyama, as well as Yuji Horii, that really boosted the sales or the interest in the series itself.
Mm-hmm.
So Dragon Quest ended up selling 1 million copies within 6 months in Japan. It ended up selling a total of 1.5 million copies overall. And in the US, it was seen as a commercial failure. For some reasons, like I already discussed with Ultima and other RPGs, being more complex or just better games in general at the time, already out in the US. And so it ended up only selling about 500,000 copies in the US, but the only reason they got to that number even was because Nintendo was giving away free copies of the Nintendo Power just to get rid of it or clear up space in the warehouses.
So that raises a question. If you wanted to buy this today, how much would it cost? And actually, how much did it cost back in the day?
Back in the day, it costed $50.
Okay, that's not bad, but how much is that relative to inflation?
$123. Actually, that's inflation for 2023.
Okay.
So actually, it's probably more accurate just because we had the pandemic inflation and all that, so.
Yes. So $50 or $123 today for what seems like today a pretty basic game. But if you wanted to buy a used copy in the present day, how much would it cost?
$8 if you want just the cartridge, but even if you want like the cardboard, the manual, everything, $50.
Not bad for a game that was a commercial failure.
Yeah, it stayed the same price base. 50 at launch, 50 now.
Cool. So, if you wanted to play the game, though, the original version is not necessarily the best version or the easiest version to access, because there have been a number of remakes and ports of the first Dragon Quest and or Dragon Warrior game. So, first, there was the Super Famicom remake, of course, only in Japan for the Super Famicom system back in 1993, which was also bundled with Dragon Quest II, getting a lot more bang for your buck. Eventually, though, it did come out on the Game Boy Color, and that was also released in the US in the year 2000. It released in Japan in 1999, so only a year difference for that Game Boy Color release. And I think that would probably be most people in the US's first experience with the game. Although I'm not 100% sure. Where did you guys start? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah, it's interesting seeing people discuss the earlier games because the Game Boy Color version, they use different translation, especially for like Erdrick. They actually translate him as Roto.
Oh yes, right.
So,
I've heard of that.
Yeah, you'll see a lot of like old school fans like use the Roto name. Like it's like, oh, they were probably Game Boy Color fans, or that's where they played first.
All right, but probably the most accessible version that is out today would be the Android and iOS port. So just on your smartphone, you can download the game. And that was released back in 2013 in Japan and 2014 in the US. That's still not the most recent port, though, because the most recent port would be the Switch, PS5, Xbox Series X port that will be coming out in 2025. But there was a port in the Switch back in 2019 that was just a direct port of the Android and iOS version. So, with all of these versions out there, there's of course been a lot of talk about Dragon Warrior throughout the ages. throughout the decades, that's more accurate. So the legacy of this game has been, it would be an understatement to say that it was monumental. This is basically the grandfather of Japanese role-playing games, and it is the grandfather of one of the most beloved franchises in Japan. Just franchises in general. Doesn't even matter, video games, books, anime. Dragon Quest is loved in Japan. Like we said, in the US, the sales were not the greatest, but it did eventually come around. Once we reached Dragon Quest VIII, I would say, whenever we picked up the Dragon Quest name itself, Dragon Quest did start to pick up in the West, but the first game wasn't quite there yet. It was new, it was different, it was something that people in the United States just quite weren't ready for yet. But that's not to say that the Dragon Warrior game or Dragon Quest game was not without its awards that it received throughout the years. So in the Famitsu Best Hit Game Awards back in 1986 in Japan, Dragon Quest was awarded with the Game of the Year, Best Scenario/Story, Best Character Design, Best Programmer for Koichi Nakamura, and Best RPG, although I imagine it didn't have very much competition back in 1986.
Well, I would be curious what their definition of RPG was back then. Like, I don't know if they might even have, like, dating sim games or something like that that could be compared to.
Oh yeah, that is true, because you are still role-playing. So, I guess this would be a good point to bring up. Throughout the rest of the talk, we might be interchanging the words JRPG and RPG. To us, those words are interchangeable for the sake of this discussion, because RPG just rolls off the tongue easier. So, anyway, I would like to know, Tyler, what is your personal history with Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest if you played one of the later ports? Because I didn't have much of a history with this game. So what was your history?
So my history was about 2 years ago. I got the collection on Switch as 1, 2, and 3 on a cartridge of like the ports of the iOS versions of these games, and I finally played through it. Other than that, I've played through most of the Dragon Quest series in general. I'm a massive fanboy of the series, been so since the DS era of all the remakes we've gotten, like the Zenithian trilogy and all that. And yeah, it's just probably my most beloved series.
Wow. That's really cool because I have no history at all with this game. I have never played Dragon Warrior. I should say I have a little bit of experience with the series as a whole because I played Dragon Quest V and Dragon Quest VIII, but other than those two games, I have never played any other Dragon Quest or Warrior game. I have only ever seen a playthrough of the original Dragon Warrior, and that was a few years ago, so my memory was already spotty for this playthrough that we did. However, I do have to say, I am a huge fanboy of the Final Fantasy series, and I always saw Dragon Quest as being the rival of Final Fantasy, so I had to defend my Final Fantasy pride by staying as far away as possible from Dragon Quest. So it was interesting to go into this game with a fresh perspective of not really knowing that much about it.
For me, it was pretty interesting going back to this after, especially because I just played through Dragon Quest III HD 2D since that remake came out about a month ago. And so, like, getting to see things that were set up in that game in relation to the story and all that compared to 1 is really refreshing to see. And I can't wait for the 1 and 2 remake, the HD 2D versions, coming out in 2025.
Yeah, the HD remakes, HD 2D remakes of 1 and 2 are definitely a huge excitement for me as well. Just the amount of ports and remakes we're getting in the HD 2D remake style from Square Enix is really making me hopeful for that eventual Chrono Trigger remake. But that is to say also that these remakes and ports do add a lot of features that weren't present in the original game. So Dragon Warrior or Dragon Quest being the first JRPG was pretty bare bones. And in fact, Yuji Horii said that he wanted to make it even simpler than the RPGs that were already available in the West, like Wizardry and Ultima. And the gameplay is very simplistic in modern standards.
A lot of like, story or narrative elements that drive that game, and like with the exploration, but not. Or gameplay-wise is still different, but like you get the picture with a lot more like dialogue present than you would see in other NES games, where most NES games you just get like dialogue at the startup screen or like the intro, and then you don't really see any dialogue other than like level start or just like congratulations you beat the game and the credits.
Or even the instruction manuals back in those days, a lot of story was just told in the instruction manual, and that's all you had to go off of. So let's talk about our own playthrough of this game.
Alright, I guess I'll start. So to start off, Dragon Quest, they get you right into the story right away. You're a descendant of the hero known as Erdrick, and you're summoned by the king. You're talking to him. The queen, Gwaelin, has been kidnapped by the Dragon Lord, and you need to save her, and you need to defeat the Dragon Lord. So as soon as you exit the castle, you could actually see on the overworld. Actually, I should back up a little bit first. So you have an overworld you could travel through, and then you have towns and castles and dungeons you could also travel through. Like for the time or whatever, like wasn't how games usually were. Like wasn't. Yeah. I guess Mario 3 wasn't out at the time to compare it to, like, because you had the overworld map where you could select levels.
I think the most comparable would be The Legend of Zelda, where you can go into dungeons, and those have their own separate map, but you also have the overworld.
Mm-hmm.
However, I would say Dragon Quest is much different because you just walk on one tile to get into a town, and then that town has its own map, and even within the town you can go into different buildings.
Right. But yeah, one thing I like in the overworld too, like especially setting up at the beginning, like you get the story right away. Like it's a very simple story, just save the princess, defeat the evil monster or whatever. But I really like that, like you could see your end goal objective as soon as you leave. Like the Dragon Lord's castle is like right there, like across the river, like always taunting you. It's like it really does just show you like your end goal, or like lets you see the big picture. And that's especially important too because Tantagal Castle is like essentially the hub world. And, like, you go back there all the time. If you want to save your game, you have to go there. You can't save your game anywhere else.
Is that true even in the Japanese version?
They had the password system, I believe. That's where you would also go to, like, get your password.
Okay. But, yeah, and before we even exit the town, or exit the castle of Tantagel, I just want to say, within the first 5 minutes of the game, don't be surprised if you're already lost, because there are specific commands within the menu to pick up treasure chests. Your first objective in the game is to open up 3 treasure chests, and I was already kind of lost at that point.
Yeah, unless you're have the manual with you, or like read through the manual like ahead of time, like that would kind of like, it is kind of like confusing at first.
Yeah.
Especially because one of those chests you get as a key, and you immediately have to use that key to unlock the door right underneath you before you can leave. And on top of that too, you go a little bit further south to exit, you stand on top of the stairs, nothing happens. You have to go into the menu and select the stairs option to go down, which sometimes could be nice, because I've definitely gone up or down stairs accidentally in other games in the past.
Me too.
But, I don't know, it's just very surprising to see.
Yeah, and I have to say, as the game progressed, because you had to go back to the king every single time who was up the stairs, I became so used to going through that cycle of going through the menu, going to the stairs option, going up the stairs, talking to the king, going back down the stairs, and having to open up my menu every single time I wanted to do that. So it was awkward at first, but then it just became part of a routine.
Mm-hmm. Also, too, like when you talk to an NPC, which I mean, there are a lot of other RPGs that are early, you had to do this too. Like, you have to stand in front of them, then you have to select the menu, and then you can, I believe you just use the search.
No, there's a talk option.
Or was there a talk option? Okay.
Yeah, there's a talk option.
Okay,
talk
so then
option.
You have to use the talk option instead of just pressing the A button or something in front of the NPC.
And thank God this is an NES game where the processing speeds are not that fast, so there were no NPCs trying to run away from you, like I've experienced in SNES RPGs. You can just stand next to the NPC and talk to them, and most of the time you're going to actually talk to them and not just talk to a blank tile. That happens sometimes.
But one thing you'll notice too, reading all this dialogue, is how they translated everything, and they use the old English style of like speaking, like "thou must" and all that.
Yes.
And it could be kind of off-putting too. Like, that's probably my biggest complaint of the original Dragon Quest games, being the old English, or the heavy use of old English.
I find it more enjoyable. It puts me in the mindset of, I'm a medieval warrior. I am doing something heroic. I'm saving a princess and defeating a dragon lord.
I mean, yes, it definitely is very good with the fitting, but I don't know, just coming from the perspective of like later games and how they like usually translate, I much prefer that. Because for context, later games, a lot of times like every town almost has like a different dialect. Like, in a lot of it, like takes inspiration from like other countries in the realms.
So using the ye old English sort of detracts from that. Did they have that sort of dynamic in the original Dragon Quest in Japan?
I honestly don't know enough about the Japanese language and how they wrote the dialogue to really say how it is for the original. I'm not sure, but like, so spoilers for Dragon Quest 3, but like they've been advertising it now for a while that it's a prequel to 1. And so like there's not a whole lot of old English in 3 until you reach the point where you go to the land of Dragon Quest 1. And then, like, it really hits you that, oh my god, this is the land of, like, this is Dragon Quest 1 we're in now. Like, seeing all the old English.
But, even though you see a lot of this old English and you do have NPCs in the towns to talk to, I have to say, the NPCs don't really have that much to say in this game. You might get 1 or 2 directions, like, oh, the princess was taken to the east. I remember in the town that is located in the northwest, so after the first town. For me, it was the second town that I entered.
Yes, that's...
Shoot, I forget the name of it already.
It's Galen something, because that's where the hero Galen was from.
That does sound familiar. So, in that second town, there's one NPC in the entire town, so you can bet that I went and talked to every single NPC in the town whenever I had the chance. But there's an NPC in that town that tells you that the princess was captured and taken to the east. Now, that would be helpful if there was any other direction to go but east, because east was the only direction available after that town. That's the way that I went, and it turned out to be the right way.
The only hint, really, that, like, Tantago or the adjacent town really give you, too, is just... There's one guard in the north end of the first floor of Tantago that tells you to basically just grind or you're going to need to grind.
Mm.
Other than that, like, the NPCs basically just give basic information on, like, playing the game itself. But I will ask you, you went to the town to the northwest, Galen's town, or whatever it's called.
Yes.
Did you stop at a cave before then?
I did stop at a cave, and it's interesting how Dragon Warrior handles caves. So you need to light a torch to gain a 3x3 block. Yeah, a 3x3 block of visibility that surrounds your player character. And even with that little bit of light, it's still difficult to navigate. It became like a maze. I felt like they were trying to emulate some type of first-person dungeon crawler experience, just with the claustrophobia of you only have your immediate tiles ahead of you visible. However, it was fairly easy to navigate, and I believe there are no random encounters, at least in that first dungeon.
In that first dungeon, I'm going to say quote-unquote, or with air quotes.
Yeah.
All there is that one chest.
Yes.
That just it actually gives you some lore on what you should actually do.
Yes.
So that chest is like a letter from Erdrick that just tells you to seek out 3 descendants of, like, important people of his time, and they will give you 3 items that you need to get to the Dragonlord's castle, which is the items that he used in his journey to get to the castle.
And I have to say that reading that note kind of invigorated me. Like, it made me want to play the game. So, even though I already kind of knew that there were these 3 legendary items just from watching a playthrough of this game previously, I felt encouraged to continue moving forward. Like, I want to get these 3 items. I want to do that. And even though the game is a bit grind heavy at the beginning, I can say that I felt progress as I made it through the first hour of the game. Like, by the end of the first hour, I felt so accomplished reaching the end of that second bridge into the new area where you started fighting enemies like Scorpion, Magidrake, Magidraki, and skeletons.
Yeah, so I like the positioning that they do have for that first dungeon, or like Erdrick's tomb.
Yeah.
As well as the Galen's town right afterwards. You hear the NPCs talking about, like, the famous hero Galen, right? So, like, that already gives you the hint that, like, okay, this town's gonna be important at some point. And you do get a few NPCs talking about how you need keys to open these doors there. So you head east, and I don't know if you got to this town. It doesn't sound like you did. Did you get to the town of Cole?
I did. That was exactly where I left off. That was the very last thing. There was an NPC I talked to that told me there's water that cures rheumatism. And I have no idea what that actually means in-game. Okay. I know what rheumatism is, but yes. I don't know what it means in-game.
I also saw that NPC, and I was confused as well.
Okay.
But if you didn't get a chance to talk to some of the other NPCs there, they talked about going south to Rimudor, and that's where you could start buying the keys, actually.
Oh, okay, so I do want to bring this up. I felt that making every single door locked with a key felt kind of tedious.
Yes.
Like, why did they have to do this? Why do I have to store this memory in my head of every single locked door? And also, why do you have to make it a limited use item of a key? Do you later in the game get some kind of magic key that allows you to open doors unlimitedly?
For the NES version, I do not think so. I'm not even sure if the original, or like some of the ports had it. It's been a while, so I don't remember, because it is a short game, too.
Yes. To be fair, it is a short game, about 10 hours, I think, I saw on howlongtobeat.com.
Yeah.
And I guess it's not that much to remember, especially because NES games did expect you to write some kind of notes for the games. I mean, even think of, like, just for the sake of comparison, the original Legend of Zelda, some things that they would want you to remember. I guess it's not that much to remember where all those locked doors are, but to have it as a limited use item really hampers the experience. Or it makes you think that the chests behind the doors are going to be super worth it, but I don't even know what's behind those doors. It could just be, like, I don't know, 100 gold or something like that.
Well, I don't know, at the same time, too, it's like what you saw was about, like, 30% of the areas for the entire game.
Dang.
So it's like, it isn't too much to keep track of doors, and plus, like, for instance, a lot of these doors are like places you have to go for story progression anyhow. Like you
Right.
have to go back to those like locked door in the Galen's town.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Tantagal, I don't think there's any item that you need to go back to those doors that are locked. But
Okay.
you're always going, like, you're gonna die or something. You're gonna get sent back to that castle anyhow.
Oh, yeah, that's a good question, though, that you bring up. How many times did you die, Tyler?
I did not count, but it was at least 5. It was probably more closer to 10 if I had to guess.
Wow, and what's the penalty for dying?
You lose half your gold, and that's it.
Okay, so not much of a hindrance to you in your playthrough, but
Right.
it does kind of slow things down, and I could imagine that it would be especially bad later in the game if you're losing thousands of gold.
Sure, but it's also convenient at times to just death warp instead of having to go all the travel, especially as you get further in the game.
I could see that. So there's no access to the spell Zoom like they have in later games?
No, but you can buy like a wing. It's like later games call them chimera wings
Okay.
to travel. But also, actually, that was something I wanted to bring up too. Like items were like stupid expensive early game. Like a medical herb alone was 24 gold.
Yeah,
Like-
you're only earning 1 or 2 gold per battle early game.
Right.
But
Yeah, so like even like when I got we both finished the game at level 5. And like even like the best enemy we could kill like fastly, I think might give you 8 gold, but then like you're using up a lot of your MP that's available to you, and you're taking a lot of damage. Another thing I noticed too, it's like the heal spell and like just healing in general is half of what later games do. So like heal on average was given about like 15 HP, but in later games it's always 30 average.
that's interesting, but you do have to keep in mind you're only keeping track of one party member throughout this whole game. So that's one thing that's a little bit different about Dragon Warrior from future entries in the game is that there is only one player character and all battles are 1v1. Also, I just want to note, for posterity's sake, I did not die throughout my entire playthrough. I was very diligent with going back to the inn, and I feel like the game had a boosted chance of escaping from battle if your health was in red.
I did not have that luck whenever I would try to run from battles.
Interesting. Okay.
But no, I wanted to show off the dying, but I also wanted the explorer. So like, more there's the cave to the east after that like first set of bridges. Like
Through the
poison.
poisons?
Yes. So first off, poison works as like a gate, like a level gate essentially. Like you need to be a certain level essentially to go through that because each one of those steps is 2 damage or 2 health. And like you barely have enough health to like even walk through that, and like you're not gonna have the resources, both items and MP, to survive through that cave. The cave itself isn't too long once you go in there, but I reached the cave, and I'd fought like 2 enemies before like I got killed. But like I wanted to show off because in that cave actually is a boss, an optional boss, because that boss is guarding the princess. They hinted at the princess being to the east, and she is in that cave.
That's so early in the game. I didn't even explore that cave.
That was kind of like what my goal was. I wanted to see like, could I at least get to that boss to fight it, just to see that like show this is there.
Yeah.
Like show how early. Like it goes back to what I was saying before. Like they really want to set you up like how close everything is to this road. Like what's your end goal? Because, like, you could see the Dragon Lord's castle. You could see the princess's location where she's being hidden by that boss. Like, all within walking distance, like, very close to the castle.
Yeah, I have to say that really motivates you to play the game more. Because in later RPGs, your goals aren't really visible, that visible to you. I don't want to get into a discussion of how this works, comparing this to later RPGs, but I liked that about this game.
I would say too, like a lot of RPGs, especially nowadays, like when the story starts and like you have no clue what the end goal is gonna be. Like you're kind of just experiencing the world itself before you figure out like what's gonna be like your character's motivations and like purpose.
It's I guess modern RPGs are still trying to go towards that feeling of progression, that feeling of growth. But I felt that progression just going from say fighting a Draki in the first spawn area of enemies in the overworld to fighting a Magidraki in the later part of the overworld. I felt that progression. I felt like I was becoming a stronger warrior as I was going through this game just by fighting 2 different enemies that were reskins.
That was by design too. Hori himself said that he wanted to make early levels easy to gain so that players would actually learn the mechanics, like learn what stats do, stuff like that, as well as like just understand what the progression of this game is going to be, since like it's pretty unique for a lot of players, like compared to like arcade style games who are just about getting score.
Yeah, and I felt like the game did a good job of teaching you that grassy path tiles have a lower encounter, whereas forested tiles have a, I believe, twice as likely encounter, and then mountain tiles are even more likely than forested encounters. And then forest tiles to produce an encounter. So I kind of like that you could choose if you wanted to grind by just walking over mountain tiles, but if you wanted to try and avoid encounters, you could just try to follow the road. In fact, I remember going back to Tantagel Castle, you could go. It would be a little bit faster to walk through forested tiles, but sometimes I would purposely avoid the forested tiles if I was trying to avoid an encounter. But I had to weigh the options, because either I could go a faster route through forested tiles or a longer route through non-forested tiles. It's not like you're completely avoiding conflict by taking the non-forested tiles, but I do like that there's that somewhat strategy in the overworld.
I was gonna say also too, that's a really nice feature to like take, or just concept in general to take into account as you're playing, because it's tons of backtracking back and forth, especially with all the deaths that you're probably going to have.
Oh my gosh,
so
yes.
Like just getting like optimal paths like will save you time in the long run. But it's also nice like whenever you need to get down and grind, because Dragon Quest 1 is a very grind heavy game. Like it's like a 10-hour game, and 8 of those hours are probably grinding alone.
And with such a simplistic battle system where your choices are fight, item, magic, run, it does become a little bit repetitive even within the first hour of the game.
Yeah, I was surprised too. Like I didn't realize the red slimes, or she slimes as they're called in later games, were actually in this game. Like all the way back then in the first. But it's also just entertaining because you immediately see reskins.
Yes.
Or you get the regular slime and then the red slime, which is slightly more HP, gives 1 more experience.
But the same amount of gold?
I believe so.
So it's interesting, though, that there's only 2 things you really need to keep track of in this game, and that is experience and gold. I mean, yes, you have to keep track of your HP and MP as well, but it's so bare bones simplistic. It was like a breath of fresh air to me compared to modern RPGs, where you have your super skill and your experience, and then you also have skill points that you can put into different trees, and then your weapons could have different types of characteristics to them. But in the original Dragon Warrior, it was basic. It was as basic as you can get, which is by design from Yuji Hori's perspective, being that this game was meant to be an introductory to the RPG genre as a whole for Japanese audiences. But it's interesting to visit this game in 2024, close to 2025, and see such a simplistic gameplay loop.
Yeah, and like it's Dragon Quest itself as a series is just defined by traditionalism and like keeping true to its core values, and like the gameplay loop that like it represents or is represented within one, or the first game, is basically the same in every game. Not to say that future games are simplistic by design or anything like that, but like it is a very not refreshing, but it is a very addictive gameplay loop, I would say. Go to a new town, get a few hints or whatever, might have to fight a boss or something like that, continue exploring.
I do know this just from random fact videos that I've watched over the years, that and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but the final boss of Dragon Warrior 1, the Dragon Lord, is the first video game boss to have a unique theme.
I don't know if that's true or not, but I feel like I've heard that before.
So it is interesting to see how much emphasis, even in the first JRPG, was placed on the final boss, because I feel like that is a signature of JRPGs, is having this climactic, epic final battle with a big bad that is more powerful than anything you have ever encountered before. Now, granted, you could say that for most games, but I feel like it's especially true for JRPGs.
Well, it also with final bosses, set a trend of multiple forms. Because the Dragon Lord has this humanoid form, and then he has this form where he actually looks like a dragon.
But, of course, that's the end of the game, so sticking close to the first hour of the game, we were nowhere near that whatsoever.
Yeah, not even a single boss fight.
Not a single boss fight. And honestly, I would have to say that's pretty par for the course even with modern RPGs. Because it's just the only difference is in modern RPGs, you're still in the character creator within the first hour. So I also want to talk about the music a little bit. And the music, as to be expected for an early NES game, was pretty basic. Although a lot of the music that Sugiyama made would go on to influence later games greatly, and these tracks would be reimagined and reused a lot. I, having not much of a connection with the Dragon Quest series, didn't feel too much connection with these songs, but I did feel kind of familiar with the overworld theme.
Yeah, the overall theme, like, really... I mean, it's just very catchy, too. Like, it's the song you probably hear the most, too, other than the battle theme.
And that reminds me of something that I read about Sugiyama's previous work before he worked on Dragon Quest. I believe he was responsible for making jingles for commercials in Japan, which kind of led him to develop this ideology that you need to make a song catchy within the first 5 seconds, because if it's not, you're already going to lose the attention of your audience. So I will say that Dragon Quest definitely has a good job of setting the tone of songs within the first 5 seconds. My issue with Dragon Quest songs in general is I never feel super pumped to listen to them. They're not super high-octane action-y. They kind of just exist in the background and set the mood. They're very good at doing that, but I never find myself trying to listen to Dragon Quest songs, say, like, to listen to study or something like that. I don't listen to Dragon Quest music in the background because I feel like I have to be playing a game with the music to really appreciate it. What about you, Tyler?
See, I'm personally a fan of the music, like, throughout all the games. I do agree with you, it's not about getting you pumped up, it's about setting the mood.
Mm-hmm.
And I think what the Dragon Quest series does better than a lot of other games and the RPG like space in general is that it really focuses on the RPG aspect of the game or the genre itself. And like part of that is setting the mood for the player to actually put themselves in the character's shoes or just the game in general.
Oh yeah, that reminds me. What did you name your character? Because as I learned, the choice that you have at the beginning of the game to name your character can actually impact your stat growth.
I name myself just my first name. That's what I do for all the Dragon Quest games. Unless there's like a canon name, I just go with my first name. So it was Tyler. But it was weird seeing in the battles because it only displayed 4 characters. Mm-hmm. So it was Tyle, so I guess Tile in battle. But like in the main menu or whatever, like looking at like my status and like my stats, then it would display the full name.
Okay. Now, more personal question for you. Did you start your name with a capital letter, and did you use all capital letters, or did you use a capital letter and lowercase letters, or what? Because apparently even those have different effects on your stat growth.
I capitalized the T, and then the rest of it was lowercase.
Mm-hmm.
What about you?
Yeah, so I used my typical name that I use whenever I name a fantasy character, which is Dak, D-A-C-H. It is an anagram of my name. I like to feel like I'm a different version of myself whenever I'm playing as these characters. So using a 4-character name, I didn't know that the menu only displayed 4 characters because my name was only 4 characters long. Speaking of the 4-character thing, those are the only characters that affect the stat growth. So the ER at TYLER, the R at the end of your name actually did not impact your stat growth.
Huh.
there are calculators out there for...
All right, that wraps up the gameplay discussion. So I think it's time we analyze the data for our first hour of gameplay. To start it off, Tyler, tell me, what was your encounter rate?
My encounter rate was 99 encounters, so close to 100, but that works out to be 1.65 encounters per minute, which just sounds insane.
Yeah, that is so high. Like, I've never really gone through RPGs and counted how many encounters I get in a certain time frame, but that does just sound so high. I got a little bit less in my first hour, only 87 encounters. So it's interesting that we had such a different experience.
Yeah, I think it probably just sums up to, since I've played Dragon Quest 1 before and you didn't, that I was more in the overworld where you were more in towns.
True, true. I think it also speaks towards the inconsistency in the encounter rate, where some points it felt like the encounter rate was super high and other points it felt super low. Maybe you just happened to have a high roll near the first hour.
Maybe, yeah. Maybe that's just because of the name, or my name ended up changing the RNG that way.
Maybe, possibly. Yeah. But yeah, so throughout all of our adventure, throughout the adventure through the first hour, how many towns and how many dungeons did you visit?
I visited 3 towns and I visited 2 dungeons. So the towns being the first town, like right next to the castle you start in, then Northwest Galen's town, whatever the official name is for that, and then finally Cole towards the end of my hour.
Yep. And the dungeons?
And dungeons-wise, Erdrick's Tomb, although it's kind of arguable if it's actually a dungeon since there's no enemies in there, but I'm counting it anyway. And then there's the Cave to Rimuladar. I went in briefly and got killed.
Yeah. I remember seeing the cave in the overworld, but I never actually ventured into it. So I only visited 1 dungeon, but I visited the same amount of towns. Not too much variability since the game is pretty linear at the beginning. So traveling through those towns and dungeons, though, how many times did you have to visit the inn, and how many times did you die?
I visited the inn a total of 7 times, and I died 4 times.
All right, so that kind of gauges the difficulty, right? Or at least it will give us a gauge for the difficulty whenever we tabulate more of this data. But man, I'm surprised you died 4 times. You're like the series veteran.
Yeah, I'll just have to make up for it in future games and not die as much.
Well, I didn't die at all. I had 0 deaths in the first hour, but I had to visit the inn 9 times.
You also didn't visit the Cave to Rimuladar.
I didn't, you're right. I'm not a true gamer. I didn't visit the cave in the first hour.
So, with all these encounters, how long did it take you to get your first encounter?
Yeah,
and how long did it take you to level up the first time?
Yeah, so the distance between the first encounter and leveling up is definitely an important thing to look at. But my first encounter was 6 minutes and 34 seconds, and my first level up was 12 minutes, 8 seconds. So about 6 minutes between the first encounter and the first level up.
For me, my first encounter was 4 minutes, 6 seconds in, and my first level up was 11 minutes, 17 seconds in, so a little bit over 7 minutes actually to level up.
Interesting. Yeah, I'd be curious to see how this pans out with later games, how big of a discrepancy there is between the first encounter and the first level up.
Yeah, this data is just will be useful as we continue covering more games to get a baseline or get a good understanding or good feel for what's like a high encounter rate, what's a high difficulty when it comes to deaths, or like how often you gotta go to the inn to actually stay afloat.
Right. And viewer, that is your incentive. Please comment down below and tell us all of your data for the first hour of gameplay. We'd love to hear how many encounters you've had, how many towns and dungeons you visited, and so on, so that we can get more of this information. Eventually, we're going to make a lot of graphs.
But first, we need to play more games to actually make those graphs. So what game are we going to play next?
Oh, wonderful question, Tyler. Next time, we'll be playing Dragon Warrior 2, so feel free to play along.
Alrighty, so with all of these stats out of the way, our first hour before us, and reflecting on it, spending this time to reflect upon it, do you think that you would spend $1 to play the first hour of this game?
Yeah, I would spend $1.
Me too. I could imagine going to an arcade cabinet, let's say, and popping in $1 worth of quarters just to play an hour of this game. I would definitely think that that's worth it. But the better question is, from this first hour experience, this demo, if you will, would you pay the full $50 for this game?
See, so like in the perspective of like at the time, yes, I would. Like, I don't know, it'd be a very long game for an NES game at the time, and it's one that you could actually continue to play versus you turn off the console like your progress is over.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
but, like,
a different mindset.
Yeah. But like nowadays, it would be hard to like pay full price for just Dragon Quest 1. I mean, even if you look at like the phone ports and all that, like they go for like not a couple dollars even. At least the older games.
I think...
But like,
yes.
Definitely well worth it for the time, for the price. 100%.
Yes, looking at it in the perspective of 1986, even 1986 in Japan, the games that were available at that time, I think Dragon Quest is a wonderful way to spend $50. I would. And looking at it in the perspective of 1989 North America, I think I would still spend the $50 just based on the first hour, because you have the interest that's given to you through the Erdrick's tomb, telling you that there's these 3 magical items, the interest of saving the princess, the interest of defeating the Dragon Lord, the interest of putting this golem to sleep. So I think that it gives you enough in the first hour to really push you towards playing more, and I think that keeps me interested enough that I would pay the $50 back in 1989 in North America. Nowadays, you have so many different ways of playing this game that it is kind of hard to justify paying $50 for a complete in-box version of the game on the NES. But I think it's also worthwhile to have just for a historical aspect because of how much history this game has.
Yeah, personally, I like that I do own the physical copy or complete in box, and like if I pull out the manual, I can start looking at the map of the world too. And I think that would give more perspective, or like maybe I wouldn't feel as lost. But like still, it is with the historical significance to it. But I think this question is interesting too, especially seeing all the re-releases. Like, it has never been re-released as just a standalone, other than like for the phone port and like just the Switch port of that phone port. Because every other re-release has bundled it with 2, and even the HD 2D remake is going to be bundled with 2 as well. And so I think Square Enix, or Enix at the time, realizes that like it is just like it is a simpler game, and like they cannot charge full price for it at this with current standards. But regardless, I am happily willing to pay whatever price they put out for the HD 2D collection with 1 and 2. Because the amount of work they added with 3, well worth it.
All right, Tyler, your job is to convince me to buy the HD 2D remake of 3, so that I can then buy the HD 2D remake of 1 and 2. But we'll get to that at a later time, because I think we will have to review Dragon Quest II first.
Yeah, that is next on the chopping block.
Alright, well, we'll get to that next time. So, thank you for listening.
Bye. You. Goodbye. Thank you for watching today and sticking to the end. We hope we gave an accurate representation of the first hour of gameplay of Dragon Warrior, and more importantly, we hope we inspired you to check out the game and give it a chance. If you liked the video, please like, comment, and subscribe for more JRPG content from us. We have a lot of projects in production, so keep an eye out. Let us know what games and series you'd like us to cover in the future. Follow us on Twitter at encounter_rate. If you want to listen to our content in a podcast format, check us out at the places listed on screen. Links will be in description. We plan to upload to additional podcast sites in the future, and if you have any preferred podcast sites you wish we were on, let us know in the comments. Feel free to stick around and watch the remaining gameplay of our first hours. Thank you again for watching. Until next time, have a great day.